But especially when that small group of people controls such things as the media, the government itself, financial institutions, the very money that's printed. You can't write these things off. I mean, hell, if I, as an individual, had control of these things, or me and a small group of select friends, so to speak, we could control the world. For sure, this country. If you control this country, and the whole world's economy is based on this country, and we can push our military weight around wherever we want, when we cannot provide these economic incentives for people to comply with what we want them to do, then, yes, you can't write these things off. It only makes too much sense. So much sense that to think otherwise would actually be the nutty thing, the uninformed decisions and thoughts and ideas of what's going on and how things work. Because it absolutely makes sense that those who own these agencies, these organizations, the very government itself, the media, the money, they write the laws. Why wouldn't you think that they're the ones in control? I mean, that only stands to reason. You'd have to be a blind fool to not make these connections once you're made aware of them. Once someone like me comes along and tells you these very same people own this, that, and the other. And then you got to go on and look and verify that. Don't take my word on it. Look it up for yourself. But then when you verify that and you see that these people do own and control these things, if you then somehow in your mind think, well, that doesn't matter, that's insignificant, then you're a fool and you deserve whatever fate they have in line for you. But otherwise, think logically, think rationally, and question anything that you think you know. Because everything that you've ever been taught, I guarantee you, is a lie. Because these people are telling you what they want you to know based on their interest, not on your own. Don't think for a moment that the government or any of these people have a single thought towards you or your family or your future when it comes to the decisions that they make. That is simply not the case. So then several decades later, in 2003, the Pentagon concluded that the Army's scientists based in Utah had indeed conducted 21 series, not just 21 experiments, but 21 series of secret at-sea tests that may have exposed sailors to chemical and germ weapons in the 1960s. Now, they admit this 40 years later. And in their extensive probe, the researchers also identified an additional 29 series of related secret tests that use similar materials on land in Utah, Alaska, Hawaii, Maryland, Florida, Georgia, Panama, Canada, and the United Kingdom. All the places that they were accused previously that I just read to you, where they denied it, here they essentially admit it. And they identified these 5,842 members of the armed services who were present at the various tests and forwarded their name to the Veterans Affairs Department in case they applied for related disability benefits or health care. But this was done under the cover, right? So these 5,842 men were not notified that this was even done, that they now qualify for these benefits 40 years later, most of them probably dead or in old age anyways, but they didn't notify them. But it's just in case they came around looking for benefits for something they didn't know existed. I mean, this is how things are done. Even when a probe is finally done and some truth is revealed, and they put aside something just in case. I mean, they don't even deserve a letter to let them know that, yeah, hey, we admit, we knowingly and willingly put you in harm's way and tested chemical weapons and stuff as you as a guinea pig. Confirming your beliefs and your thoughts that you've been sick for all these years and letting you know that, hey, we did it. And now you can be compensated. I mean, personally, if they did that to me, there's no amount of money that you couldn't put a price tag on my health or on a lost loved one. But at the very least, admit that you were wrong, let me know about it, and if there are some types of benefits that are there for me, let me know. I mean, it's quite simple. But they're still slimy even in situations like this, even when they do come clean or when an independent researcher proves that these things happen. They still do things in an underhanded and slimy ass manner that completely backhands those that serve them and selfishly serve them and gave up their health and in many instances their lives. This is how they get treated. But the funny thing about it is the Pentagon denied this right up until the last minute. They denied it, and then after pressure from national media, members of Congress, the VA, and sailors, the Pentagon finally said in May of 2002 that some initial research showed such tests happened. It pledged to finish an extensive study by the end of June 2003 to identify all trials and the places, substances, and people involved. Of course, we're in 2008 now. 2003 is 5 years in the past. They still have done no such thing or kept any of their promises. But after denying it for 4 decades, why should we expect anything more from them? We should expect exactly that, a bunch of lies and false promises that never become realized, that they have no intent on following through on. The independent researchers not only identified the nearly 1,200 tests of chemical agents at Dugway, which spread the 500,000 pounds of nerve agents into the wind, they have also identified 328 open-air germ warfare tests, as well as 74 radiological dirty bomb tests, and the equivalent of 8 intentional meltdowns of small nuclear reactors. And in the at-sea test, sailors, and now these documents, said that clouds of chemicals or germs were spread into the winds as ships and tugboats sailed through them to test how clouds would spread, and also to test the detectors and protection and decontamination systems. So they knowingly and willingly dragged these sailors through a cloud of death, basically, and they didn't tell them what it was, and they let them think that they were protected from it and safe. Of course, these sailors trusted their government. They trusted their superiors, which should be a lesson to us all, to never trust the government, to never think that they're looking out for our best interests, because they clearly are not. They've proven this time and time again. And you'd have to be a fool to have not learned that lesson at this point in time. I mean, what would it take for you to learn this lesson? How many lives have to be lost? How many attacks do they have to carry out on our own people before we finally realize that our government is not our own? We don't control it. They're not looking out for our best interest. It's been infiltrated. There's a bunch of foreigners, people that don't give a shit about us, about our interest, or our very lives. They've killed more of us than these supposed enemies, these false enemies that they portray through their media, whether it's the Russians or the communists or the Arabs or these terrorists, so on and so forth. They're always providing us with these false enemies, Democrats, Republicans, so on and so forth. We're always at each other's throats, never once looking in their direction. And it goes on and it goes on, and nothing ever changes. Decades and decades and decades have gone by, and these very same people are still doing and carrying out the same exact things. And we think, oh, it's the Republicans, or it's George Bush, or it's the Russians, or it's the communists, or the terrorists, or it's someone and something, and we solve these problems, so to speak. The Cold War is over, right? We do this, we do that. Something else happens. We get this president out of office. The Democrats take over. The Republicans take over the Congress, so on and so forth. But nothing ever changes. These are just temporary illusions. And most of us take the bait, hook, line, and sinker, and we'll go out and, hey, vote now, and that's just the calling card, and that's, you're doing your civic duty by encouraging people to vote in a system that is set up for you to fail. You're wasting your time with such political solutions, playing their game by their rules. This is what they want you to do, blaming people that they've already chewed up and spit out and used to carry out their deeds. And all the while they go unchallenged, unquestioned. But hey, right, I'm the bad guy for even pointing these things out. So then you think, yeah, all this stuff happened decades ago, right? Well, not necessarily. They have plans to take the boards off the Baker Laboratory on the U.S. Army's Dugway Proving Ground. And they don't appear to be in the best interest of the nation. Of course, not in the best interest of Utah in particular. Army officials say the lab, which was replaced by a newer facility in 1998, will be used to test the effects of anthrax and other biological warfare agents on protective equipment and detection systems. Again, I mean, when has another government actually used these agents or these chemicals or any of this against us? Never. But the United States government has. This is a fact. So they say that due to the threats of terrorist attacks, this type of research is necessary and more lab space is needed. So here they go blaming it on terrorists. It used to be Russia and communism, and now it's terrorists. In the name of protecting our citizens from this risk that we don't even know to be real, or in actuality, time and history will tell us that it's really not a real threat. The Russians or these terrorists would have no reason to attack us if we didn't give them a reason. Well, first and foremost, these same people control the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, and they still have a great deal of control over Russia as well. So they play both sides of the fence. That's a fact. And while we die and we suffer, their control becomes that much greater and their power over us. And while we're at each other's throats and blaming each other, they're on both sides profiting. Same thing happened in World War II and in countless other instances as well. But don't think for a moment that these are our real enemies. The average Russian citizen is not an enemy to the average American, no more than the average Iraqi was an enemy to the average American or European. These people have made it that way. They wouldn't have been our enemies if it wasn't for them making them our enemies, or giving us the illusion that they were our enemies, that they're going to attack us. So let's create these nasty and disgusting biological weapons that have no place in a civilized society. Absolutely none. There's other ways that we could protect ourselves. And if we weren't creating them, and if their Russian puppets weren't creating them, then they wouldn't have been created in the first place, because that's where all this stuff's come from. And anyone else that creates it, they've stolen information from us with spies and stuff. So these things, most of it, by far, have been created in the United States and the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, and Russia as well. Now they're still creating this stuff as well. And you're talking about diseases, biological weapons that could wipe out the whole human race. There's absolutely no justification for creating such things, especially to say we're doing it to defend ourselves against terrorists. And especially when the terrorists aren't using these against our citizens, but the government, who's there to protect us, they are using it against our citizens. And to sit here and say, well, it's only a population of 20,000, it's only a population of 30,000 or 10,000 or even 2,000. Does that justify it? To use them as guinea pigs? Don't even let them know? Tell them, hey, get out of your home, leave, don't ever come back? No, they just do it. And the kids, the animals, the old people, everybody, it doesn't matter. Whoever's there gets poisoned. They don't even know it. They start dying. They can't have babies. They have all kinds of illnesses, cancer, all kinds of bad things. But, hey, they deserve it. Why? Because it's a small population? Well, I guarantee you that they wouldn't do these things near their families' homes if it was even just a population of 3. But that happened to be their wife and their 2 children. It wouldn't be done. But they view us as cattle. Hell, I wouldn't even do that to cows. But they do it to large populations, and I consider 10, 20,000 people, that's a large population. That's a lot of suffering. A lot of people die needlessly. In the name of protecting us against a threat that's not even real, that hasn't even been realized, and then they write it off that it's unpopulated areas are not densely populated. Wow. I mean, do any of you think that that's okay? To knowingly conduct these tests when the wind's blowing towards a population of 20,000, 30,000, because that's the case with some of these experiments, and doing it and knowing, absolutely knowing that it's going to affect these populations of tens of thousands of people, and then doing it anyways, and doing it in many instances with the intent of testing that effect. This is absolutely inexcusable. We should be in the streets. I mean, we're talking about premeditated murder, mass murder of tens of thousands of people. Wow, I mean, it leaves me speechless. It leaves me enraged. We shouldn't be sitting on our asses allowing them to continue doing these types of things to us, let alone being naive and thinking that they're actually acting in our best interest. If you think that at this point in time, I don't know what to say to you. Then maybe you need to go move next to these facilities and have it affect you before you come to realize these things, or lose a family member of yours, and then come back and tell me that it doesn't matter. Until then, I really don't want to hear anyone even suggest such a thing. So the article continues, and it says, let's keep our eye on the ball here. The Army is expanding its experimentation with deadly pathogens for classified defense purposes. And that's scary. It's no wonder we're concerned. We're concerned because much of what happens at Dugway is top secret. We do know, however, that the 1,300 square mile facility, about 80 miles southwest of Salt Lake City, is one of the Army's primary chemical and biological defense testing centers. Of course, they call it defense testing centers, my ass. And contains some of the nastiest bacteriological and chemical agents that nature and man have ever devised. And we're concerned because history has taught us to be. Let's not forget those 6,000 sheep that were killed outside the proving ground boundaries in 1968. The Army never admitted that it was nerve gas gone astray, but they reimbursed the farmers and promised to never conduct chemicals in the open air again. Here's some excerpts from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists magazine, which was posted in the March-April release in 2001 on pages 57 through 61. From 1951 to 1969, hundreds, if not thousands, of open-air germ warfare tests were conducted at Dugway on human volunteers and animal test subjects. Many of the aerosol dispersal tests during the Cold War introduced non-indigenous diseases or increased the geographical range of indigenous diseases to Utah and surrounding states, including encephalitis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Q fever, anthrax, brucellosis, plague, all of which now are considered endemic among the native wildlife. In 1959 and 1960, an epidemic of Q fever was found among Utah desert wildlife. So they basically intentionally introduced these diseases into the native wildlife, along with several human test subjects as well. But they've basically poisoned the food supply as well, knowingly. For what? Just to test and see how these things spread without letting people know? And first of all, I don't care if you let everyone know. Why would you go and poison the food supply and introduce these horrible diseases that could spread and become an epidemic and, kill millions of people possibly? And to do this with intent, in the name of science, in the name of national defense? What a load of bullshit. These are some sick, twisted, evil motherfuckers that are not only out to kill us, they're carrying it out. They've done it. The Utah Health Department has also reported cases of Q fever among humans, all subsequent to the 1955 human and animal field tests and releases at Dugway. The Army deliberately infected and released a variety of animals and insects to determine the rate and extent of disease dispersal through native animal populations. The Army's live agent testing program, designed to include trials at sea, in the tropics, and in the Arctic, reached far beyond the borders of the continental United States to include sites in Alaska, Central America, the Far East, the Caribbean, and over the Pacific Ocean, aimed at determining animal, plant, and human reactions to the exposure to putative biological weapons agents. The Army allegedly conducted clandestine tests in South Korea, Liberia, Egypt, and Okinawa. In 1981, troops trained at the Jungle Warfare Training Center at Fort Sherman, Panama, contracted the mosquito-borne disease Venezuelan equine encephalitis, VEE, an outbreak that was eventually linked to a military experiment conducted in 1970. A consequence of this test, VEE remains an endemic threat in certain areas of Central America. Little progress has been made to date in identifying, let alone or eliminating the contamination at Dugway, as well as in all of these other sites worldwide. So to ever get a true scope of the damage that's been done worldwide is impossible, let alone to ever hope to get them under control. And even less thought and attention has been given to defining the nature and extent of the problems caused by tests at Dugway and other sites around